Hello and welcome to The Agenda, where we tackle the pressing issues shaping our nation and their impact right here in Delaware. I'm your host, Kerwin, and today we are joined with someone who knows these challenges all too well, U.S. Senator Chris Coons. With the Republican trifecta now holding the presidency, Senate, and the House, the political landscape in Washington has shifted dramatically. What does this mean for Democrats? And more importantly, what does it mean for Delawareans? Can Democratic lawmakers find common ground effectively and push back right against the Republican agenda? We're going to talk about that today. Welcome, Senator Coons. Again, back to the agenda. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Kerwin. Always good to be on with you.
A lot of Delawareans are wondering. A lot of Americans are wondering too about this. I'm calling it the Republican trifecta. And there's so much going on. You have always had your finger on the pulse of what's going on down there in Washington and making those changes. What are your thoughts right now as you go back into session?
Well, we're in session.
In session, excuse me.
Part of the challenge has always been gauging the gap between Donald Trump's rhetoric and reality. As he was campaigning, he was throwing out a lot of different things. If you've ever gone to one of his rallies or watched one of his rallies, they are long, rambling, often unfocused, sort of word salads of lots and lots of different ideas. Some of them alarming, unprecedented, unconstitutional. Some of them sort of straight down the middle things that average Americans want. And I think he won the election because a number of Americans chose to believe that he was actually going to deliver on things he was talking about, in particular, reducing costs. Folks were mad about inflation. They were mad about how costs went up too quickly and haven't come back down, and they're trusting him to actually bring down prices. The reality of what he says is his agenda for early next year once he becomes president on January 20th is that if he carries through on his threats to impose 25% tariffs on all imported goods from Mexico and Canada, and more than that on goods from China, all of our prices are going to go up and go up quickly because we import huge amounts of produce, furniture, electronics, cars, you name it, from our top three trading partners. So he's gone back and forth just in the last week on whether in fact he will impose those huge tariffs. He continues to misrepresent that tariffs are paid by foreign countries when in fact the costs will be borne by consumers. And it's clear that the Republican majority in the Senate intends to use something called reconciliation, which allows them to jam a bill through with 50 votes to extend and make permanent the massive tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans that he passed in 2017, and to do something significant with immigration. He's suggesting that he would like to deport at least 1 million people from the United States. If we could come together and focus on prioritizing deporting those who have committed crimes while in the United States, I think he'd get support for that. If instead he goes back to his priority from his previous administration, which was deport everybody who is here illegally, he likely won't get support from some cities, some states, and some legislators.
Do you think that that's we can jump right into immigration?
Sure.
I've had someone come up to me that is a family friend and say, would you take our kids? And I said, take them to McDonald's? And they said, no. If this immigration issue happens, would you be responsible for my children? And I'm trying to reassure them that America, we will figure out a way. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking there is momentum behind this. Sure. How real is that? That you could tell the Delawareans right now that may have citizenship issues, we'll just call them that, should they take action?
So I think what President Trump is most intent on is trying to deter future migration into the United States and secure the border. That is costly, expensive, and difficult. And part of why President Biden called for Congress to act in his annual State of the Union addresses was it takes legislative action to spend the money at the border to secure the border. There are changes to our asylum laws, to our deportation practices, to our legal processes that was proposed by a bipartisan group of senators that I would have supported if we'd gotten a vote on it last year, that can dramatically reduce the number of people crossing the border. The question, though, is how many folks who are currently here, and in many cases have been here a long time, are going to be at risk of being deported. It's very expensive, and it poses a lot of civil liberties and civil rights risks to use the military, which is something President-elect Trump has said he wants to do, to, instead of keeping us safe overseas, try and round up people who are here illegally. You have to ask yourself, how would that happen? Exactly how would that happen? Who decides who's here illegally? Do you force employers to do citizenship and status checks of everybody who works in their gardening or hotel or hospitality or food processing facility? That's one possibility. Lots of employers are concerned about that. Do you use the police to do random identity checks? I don't carry my birth certificate with me. I do have a driver's license. But if we start having identity checks at border points internally on highways and as people go from town to town, you'll have a huge impact on commerce and on people's sense of confidence. The question that was asked of you is being asked of me. What happens to a mixed status family where the children are U.S. citizens, having been born here? One parent is not here legally. The other one is here on a green card. I'm just making that fact pattern up. If the person who is here without legal status gets rounded up and deported, what's the impact on the rest of the family? And in a recent interview, President-elect Trump said, well, we'll just deport the whole family. Mm-hmm. You can't legally do that.
Right.
You can't just deport American citizens without some just cause. And there will be serious fights about how to change or implement our immigration laws early next year. I cannot be more reassuring than that, because the people President-elect Trump is nominating or intends to nominate.
Especially with the Secretary of Defense, the possible nomination that might get that order from the president to say to do that, I think he would go along with it.
I can't speak to that, having not met Mr. Hegseth, but I'll tell you that lots of military leaders have said this would be a profound distraction from their core mission and a misuse of military assets. We just had a hearing on this on the Judiciary Committee this past week. Lots of Americans are upset that in the last few years they feel the border was not secure and there were too many crimes committed in the United States by people here illegally. And we have to address that. But we should not throw away our core values, our being a welcoming country, and we should not ignore the impact on our economy, our communities, and our values of having a deportation process that is random and that tries to round up literally millions of people. A bipartisan dialogue about exactly how to achieve the goal of securing our border and removing those who are committing crimes while here could be positive. But doing so in a way that scares people and that leads to the possible deportation of millions of folks who have families here, who have businesses here, and who've been working here for years would be profoundly harmful to who we are as a country.
So let's talk about some matters here at home real quick. We're going to talk about education. You know the problems that Delaware's having with education. It's not a secret, but fact of the matter is President Trump is giving serious thought and consideration to ending the Department of Education, rolling that back to the states. What is your thoughts in regards to that? And do you think Delaware's ready? Well, we might not have a choice to accept that responsibility, even though we're behind the 8 ball now in regards to getting our kids to proficiency.
So it depends what exactly he means by ending the Department of Education. There's a bill by one Republican colleague of mine that would simply end the bureaucratic administrative body of the Department of Education, but move all of its functions. Higher ed loans would go to Treasury. The Title I grant programs would go back to HHS. It depends what happens to the funding. If the funding gets eliminated, that would have a huge impact on Delaware. Because what the real role is of the Federal Department of Education is helping address historic inequalities and provide resources to minority schools that are mostly low income and that lack the resources to deliver free and reduced lunch, curricular support, infrastructure and resource support to improve the quality of education in under-resourced schools. 90% of the funding of public education comes from states, school districts, and communities. That critical 10% that comes from the federal government is particularly relevant to schools like the schools we have in Delaware that are under-resourced. So it would be a big impact. It would be a huge impact on our state budget and would cause real challenges in public education in Delaware.
Does Delaware's role in education, or its current ranking in education, how much of it comes back up to your office in the Senate? Like, are you seeing this every day, and are there plans, are there conversations? We just want to know because it's not going well, and it doesn't seem to be getting any better.
It is something I hear from Delawareans about. It is not something I get calls or emails from constituents about, because it is correctly perceived as being mostly a state and local issue. Yeah. But the federal role in college loans, in investments in community colleges, in investments in the VOTEC system, and in particular in that critical balancing, the investments that address historic inequalities, that's something that I am concerned about, and I hear about, particularly with this concerning proposal to eliminate the federal Department of Education.
Yeah, we're talking about ending the Department of Education. There's so many other things going on in Washington. We have gone through this before with President Trump. 4 years or 8 years ago, we've been in the same position of where we're going to have to work in this bipartisan nature. But now it just seems like our hands are tied behind our backs. Is that true? Can we still get things done in Washington?
So I have friends in the Republican caucus who I work with on legislation. Senator Todd Young of Indiana, he and I were texting this morning. I was talking yesterday to John Cornyn, to Lindsey Graham, to Tom Tillis. These are all conservative Republicans. It's my job to keep moving legislation if at all possible. But on the biggest questions, I expect that the new Republican majority of 53 Republican senators in January will do everything they can to push through President Trump's agenda. And it will be very hard for those of us in the minority when the Republicans control the House, control the Senate, control the White House, and frankly have a conservative majority on the Supreme Court. It'll be difficult for us to have any significant impact.
Right. So expect that. You would tell Delawareans expect
that.
Expect that.
The key piece of leverage that Democrats have in this coming Congress is that there aren't enough Republicans willing to actually vote for an appropriations bill. Mm-hmm. I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I'm on the largest of the appropriations subcommittees. That means the federal government will shut down without Democrats voting for appropriations bills. So we may very well have a government shutdown next year as we try to work out our saying, no, we have to invest in education, healthcare, the environment. I expect the Trump administration to come forward with a budget that dramatically increases investment in defense and dramatically cuts spending on education, the environment, and healthcare. And we're then going to have months of negotiating over that.
So dealing with the Democratic Party, you guys took a blow last month. And it seems as though so many have said, I've listened to James Carville, I listen to his podcast regularly, and I understand a lot of what he says, but he brought up something really good, Senator, and we've lost touch. It seems like the Democratic Party has lost touch with the belly of the party. Mm-hmm. And we were brought up from a party that dealt with blue-collar workers, that understood the people in the plants, knew those folks there, and represented them. And it seems as though, not all candidates, but it seems as though they were skipped in this election. And they went to the right. And that's going to take some rebuilding to do.
Yep.
Do you agree with that? And is there a plan? Please tell me there's a plan to build that base back up again.
Part of our challenge is there isn't one plan. There's right, because we've got the House Democratic Caucus, the Senate Democratic Caucus, and a lot of governors who want to be the next president. So the Democratic National Committee, or the DNC, which principally exists to elect presidents, is having an election right now over who will be the next chair of the DNC. Mm-hmm. It's been Jamie Harrison of South Carolina, a dear personal friend, the last actually more than 4 years. And there's a bunch of different candidates. And literally right now, they're having debates about who ought to be the next chair of the DNC. That debate is also around this issue. Why did we lose? Why did we lose not just 3 or 4 of the swing states, but all 7 of the key swing states? I did a lot of campaigning for Joe Biden and then for Kamala Harris. I spent about 60 days on the road going across rural Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Arizona. We had a lot of volunteers and a lot of energy and a lot of excitement to support the Democratic candidates for the Senate, most of whom I was campaigning for, and for Vice President Harris. And we didn't see any grassroots organizing by the Trump campaign. And it turned out that what we dramatically misjudged was how effective their outreach on social media was. You may have heard of a guy named Elon Musk, the owner of one of the most important social media platforms. He had far more impact, particularly on young men and in some demographics where we thought we were going to be successful and we weren't. I'll remind you, this was a very close election. Donald Trump didn't get 50% of the popular vote. 240,000 votes across 3 states, and right now you'd be asking me about the upcoming inauguration of President-elect Harris. So this was not, out of 350 million people, 240,000 people in 3 states made the difference. So it's a 50.1, 49.8% election. But we thought we were going to win. We didn't, and we need to pay attention to why not. To your point about losing touch, Joe Biden was the most pro-union, blue-collar, Democratic president
and they
we've
still
had
didn't
in
vote
50
for
years.
him.
Still didn't vote for him. They're not buying what we're selling.
Right.
The parties have switched. The Democratic Party was predominantly the party of the working class, of people who weren't college educated, who weren't socially progressive, who were about faith, family, hard work, and opportunity. And those are a lot of the values that inform Joe Biden and his leadership and his life. Folks looked at Kamala Harris and they didn't know her, and they didn't believe that she actually understood the middle class. The Republicans were able to paint her as a San Francisco liberal and someone who was an activist, who was going to be pushing ideas that middle America didn't want. Unfortunately, the really strong record of the Biden-Harris administration in terms of what they've done for jobs and for infrastructure and for manufacturing and for our place in the world didn't really matter. And folks were willing to believe that Donald Trump would do a better job for the economy and for them and their families than Kamala Harris and Governor Walz.
Do you think gender played a big role in it?
It played a role. To suggest that this is a country where women and people of color are viewed equally would just be to ignore reality.
Right.
But I think it is too easy to say that that was the reason for the outcome. And we can't skip the hard part of saying, why are folks not listening to us? Why are they not believing what Democrats have to say? I have 25-year-old twin boys. One of them said to me, "Dad, I hear you're running all over campaigning, but I never see anything or hear anything about it." I should have paid more attention to that.
Right.
My twins are listening to Joe Rogan. They're not watching CNN. They're not watching the National Evening News. They're not watching Fox News. They're getting their news off of TikTok, Instagram, and through podcasts and through social media outlets that I've never even heard of. And the vice president started doing all those interviews in the last 6 weeks. She started going on some of these edgier, interesting, more new media outlets, and it was too late and not enough.
Yeah.
Folks had already set their mind about who Donald Trump was and what he's about. Look, at the end of the day, the American people are mad. They're mad, as they are all over the world. Incumbent parties have lost in almost every major election around the world in the last year. And folks blame Biden for the outcome of the pandemic, the economic outcome of the pandemic, which bluntly I think gets it backwards, because I think Donald Trump was responsible for mishandling
And
the
it isn't
pandemic.
something that we planned for, so everything was trying to figure it out.
And our economy recovered from the pandemic better than any economy in the world. That just ticks off the average person when you say that. Because they go, well, I don't care that we're doing better than Japan and Great Britain and Germany and all. Like, I'm not living in those countries. I'm living here and I'm mad that my eggs cost so much. They're going to discover that Donald Trump isn't going to be able to bring down costs either. And they're going to discover that if he actually carries out his ideas, inflation's going to go up and growth is going to go down. But the results of the election was that because of cultural issues, folks didn't trust us and they didn't listen to us. And now we're going to have a fight about, Bernie Sanders says we need to go farther to the left. We need to be more aggressively activist leftist. And there's other voices in our party saying, nope, you got to meet people where they are and you got to be clear about your agenda and how you're going to make a difference for their lives. And the question we're going to wrestle through as a party is, which of those paths is the right path for our party?
I don't think the far leftist approach is the best. I think that's what a lot of people were upset about. And all you're doing is compounding those issues. I think it's good to go ahead and reach people where they are. Senator, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Kerwin.
We know you have an
Great to be
extremely busy schedule. Thank you for taking the time to talk to Delawareans. And
Happy
if
to.
there's ever an issue you want to get out, please get it out right here on the agenda.
Thank you.
You all, thank you so much for tuning in this week. Thank you for watching. Happy holidays to those that are at home. And we look forward to seeing you in the new year right here on the agenda. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our conversation with Senator Coons. It's always a privilege for him to be here and have a U.S. Senator take time to be on the agenda. I just want to backtrack on a couple things and talk about it. I think that the Democratic Party is in trouble, more so than what is disclaimed. I think that we have become too woke, so to speak, and I don't think that the far left is where we need to go. Somehow or another, this country needs to get right in the middle. We need to talk about issues that are pertaining to everyone, and there is just too woke, so to speak, for so many of us, and there is no way that I believe the Democratic Party is going to maintain to win elections by continuing on the path that they are on currently. I think it is known, and Washington now knows. So what do we do to fix it? I don't know, but we cannot do more of the same. I believe that social media plays a very big part in regards to the outcome of elections. I think it is now the way. No longer can we depend on large media outlets to get information for so many reasons, right? We're depending on so many other people to get that information when we have so many other podcasts and things that can deliver the same information. So how do we depend on that? How does the Democratic Party begin to weave themselves into it in a way that the Republican Party did so well and their outcome? And now look at where we are. We're at a place, and you've heard me say time and time again, and with the Department of Education and Education right here in Delaware, I don't think that many Delawareans understand. And I'll take this for granted that they don't understand. This systemic nature of education throughout the state, throughout the country, and how it will affect the outcome of your children, just not now, okay? Not just through their next 5 years, not through their overall high school career, but it will affect their employment, which will then affect how their kids are raised. Your grandkids, my grandkids, is all dependent upon education right now. What I worry about, sincerely worry about, is the gap. What do I mean by the gap? The gap is from us realizing that there's a problem, and we do realize that there's a problem, right? To then coming up with a solution, okay? And then implementing that solution and getting results. How much of a gap, flash to bang, you may have heard me say, is that going to be on our education system? Is it going to be 5 years? Is it going to be 7 years? Is it going to be 10 years? Because right now, we don't even have that number down. And then what do we do for those youngsters that are caught in that gap? I'm going to be honest with you. I looked at the proficiencies of some of our VOTEC schools, and some of our VOTEC schools right here in Wilmington, Howard. And I saw the reading proficiencies for them. And I saw the math proficiencies for them. And I became very, very worried because these are folks that are coming right out into education as soon as they graduate. And they have those same education deficits that are going to have a systemic effect all throughout the educational system and throughout the employment. How do we bring in employers now? How do we tell them that Delaware is the place to be? Delaware is the place to bring your employees' children in so you can have an academic future. Do you think that does not affect our socioeconomic climate here in the state? It absolutely does. Education is systemic, I tell you, absolutely systemic, and it affects so many things. And I honestly think that now that the election is over, those quiet points are being pushed away, just being pushed away. and we're not bringing them to the forefront. And I challenge all the candidates that win. I'm excited to see what Matt Meyer does as governor. And I know that education is on the forefront of his mind. He is a teacher. He gets it. He understands. But until these things are implemented, that gap is getting longer and longer and longer, and more kids, youngsters, are falling into it. I saw that the previous superintendent for Christina School District is suing the school district for $2.7 million for false firing, and defamation of character, and so many other things. $2.7 million. Now what? That's $2.7 million if he wins, if he's successful. But from all the research that we've done, the Christina School District was made aware of the issues prior to letting him go. And they still continued down the path in spite of legal advice telling them not to. Let's just be honest, that's what it is. So there's going to be some compensation there. There's going to be something. And now we have that to worry about. We have that to worry about. One of the largest school districts in the state that's not doing well. And now we're worried about this. Delaware, I have concerns. And I know that you have concerns too. I know that you have concerns too. So please comment in. Let us know what your concerns are. And not only will we read them, we will do the very best that we can to get that representation on this show, because it's important and they can't run from it. And believe it or not, a lot of our state representation, a lot of our city representation and county representation, they want to be a part of this, and they're getting this information out here. But the demarc is coming. The new year has begun, will soon begin, excuse me. And there will be a reckoning for education. We're going to have a whole new president that is wanting to take away the Department of Education. And what does that mean for the state? Is the state ready to do that? Is our new Secretary of Education prepared? What's their plan? I don't know. I'm concerned. But I guarantee you this, we'll talk about it right here on the agenda. We're going to talk about it then. We're going to talk about so many things in the new year, and I look forward to going through it with you. So let's do it. Everyone have a safe and happy holiday. God bless every one of you. I'll see you in the new year.